Imagine standing with dust on your shoes, the wind carrying the salt of an ancient sea, and the faint scent of myrrh from a distant sanctuary. Imagine reaching out with your palm and feeling the cool grit of stone that has known prayers for millennia. In this journey, we will reveal 20 biblical locations and show what they really look like today, blending scripture, excavations, and the lives of people who still call these places home. Some will be almost unchanged, as if time has kept a gentle watch. Others have been reshaped by centuries of conquest, worship, and modern life, so that the scene in the text no longer matches the map of memory. But be warned, familiarity can deceive you, and sacred names do not always point to obvious ruins. Can faith be read in the color of a dome or in the curve of a wall? Is a promise held in a fragment of pottery or in the rhythm of a prayer at dawn? Jerusalem carries the weight of kings and prophets, of temples and treaties, of psalms murmured at a low stone wall. Today, we begin an extraordinary walk across history and across contested land. Stay with me, and you will discover which places preserve secrets in plain sight, and which conceal evidence that challenges long-held assumptions. I am the narrator and traveler in this account, but not the only witness. My backstory matters because the way one listens to stone is born of memory. I grew up in a small town from which my family emigrated carrying a tattered Bible and a box of old photographs. Childhood memories smell of lemon oil and dust, and of a grandmother who would trace the margins of scripture with ink-stained fingers. My formal study moved me from those kitchen table readings to university archives, where I learned to read pottery sherds the way others read poetry. A crisis came when a dig I joined revealed a mosaic beneath a church floor that contradicted my early certainties. For a while, I questioned whether archaeology was an act of devotion or of demolition. Today, I travel with the humility of someone who knows both the comfort of faith and the stubbornness of evidence, listening to guides, priests, fishermen, curators, and pilgrims whose names you will hear along the way. Jerusalem is unavoidable. Walk with me along narrow alleys that open onto courtyards where the dome of a mosque catches the morning light and a church bell answers with a metallic echo. You can smell baking bread in the old quarter and the resinous smoke of incense in a small chapel. The Bible records temple and sacrifice and prophetic judgments. Archaeology here offers layers like pages in a palimpsest. Excavations by the Israel Antiquities Authority have revealed ritual baths, cisterns, and the remains of walls that may belong to Herodian expansion. At the western wall, pilgrims press their fingers into seams of ancient masonry and slide prayers into hinkala. Crevices, a tactile practice that connects past petitions to present hands. There is tension here, a political and spiritual weight that compresses ordinary life. At Jaffa Gate, a guide named Layla talks about daily life. Layla says, "You cannot separate the sacred from the municipal." Jacob, a pilgrim from Ohio, says, "I came to stand where David walked." Dr. Miriam Katz, an archaeologist, says, "Stratigraphy tells a story, but it does not tell every story." Ahmed, a cobbler in the Armenian quarter, says, "My grandfather knows the stones by name." Father Elias, a priest from the Christian quarter, says, "Every footstep here is prayer." The place is both museum and breathing city, and that contradiction is its most honest testimony. Bethlehem is quieter in its limestone towns and olive groves. The church that marks tradition of a birth is layered with Byzantine mosaics and later Crusader additions. In narrow lanes, you can feel the roughness of carved stone under your fingertips and taste sweet pastries sold by women who have baked in the same ovens for generations. Excavations around the grotto have yielded early liturgical inscriptions and fragments of floor mosaics that speak to centuries of pilgrimage. Yet, Bethlehem today is a town living with modern pressures and shifting borders, which color the devotion of its people and the rhythm of church bells. The Sea of Galilee is a freshwater mirror that can be glass smooth at dawn or whipped into waves by sudden winds. Fishermen still mend nets on its banks, and an ancient boat preserved in mud has been lifted into a museum to prove the continuity of seafaring life in the region. When you run your hand along the hull of that boat, the wood is pitted and salt-stained, and the smell of lake algae and diesel from a passing launch overlays the sediment scent of old oak. At Tabgha, the mosaic fish and loaves are bright and weathered at once, preserved under a protective canopy after excavation by German archaeologists. Pilgrims light candles and monks chant in a rhythm that seems to cue the lapping of the water. Mount Sinai is a study in austerity. Stones lie in piles like quiet witnesses, and the air is thin and cold at dawn. Tradition places the thunderous voice of God on this slope, and monasteries cling to the remoteness with icons and oil lamps. The most famous monastery claims rocks and scrolls and a continuous liturgy that connects desert silence to communal memory. Archaeological debate continues about the exact mountain mentioned in Exodus, but the experience of ascent remains a ritual. Your breath fogs in the morning cold, and the taste of dust is metallic at high noon. Guides like Thomas, who lead pilgrims here, speak of nights when the stars seem to tilt closer to Earth. And Professor Rahim, an epigrapher from a regional university, recounts inscriptions in nearby caves that echo ancient hymn fragments. The Dead Sea is a geological wonder and an archaeological archive. Its surface shimmers and refracts sunlight into a white glare, and its shores hold the earliest copies of biblical texts discovered in modern times, the manuscripts at changed scholarly conversation. The smell here is mineral, and the texture of mud is dense and slippery, a tactile memory for every visitor who floats effortlessly on the surface. The scrolls found in the surrounding caves were preserved by climate and neglect, and now live in climate-controlled displays at the Israel Museum and in institutional archives, their fragility a reminder of how close texts were to being lost. The very fact of preservation raises questions about ownership and access that entangle scholars, curators, and local communities. Jericho, the ancient, tells a story of walls and palms. When you stand among the tell, the soil is sandy and warm, and pottery fragments glitter in the sun like small confessions. Archaeologists have debated the chronology of the site's destruction and rebuilding, and epigraphic finds give tantalizing clues about trade and ritual. The modern oasis is irrigated and green, and the contrast between arid hills and cultivated valley is almost theatrical. Pilgrims leave small stones at a site that tradition associates with conquest and new beginnings. Mount Carmel is dramatic in both scripture and present topography. It is a green ridge above the Mediterranean, with pines and citrus and a sense of altitude that opens the horizon. Tradition remembers a contest of prophets, archaeology records temples and altars, and a continuity of ritual on the ridge. At a small shrine, a local named Hanan lights a stick of incense and points out a stone altar used in antiquity. The wind brings the scent of resin and citrus, and the sea hums beneath the cliffs. Here, we reconstruct a moment in a dialogue that may never have been recorded, the way a drama is reconstructed from fragments. The exchange below is a modern reimagining intended to capture tension and conviction around a contested act of prophecy and ritual. "Elijah," said the man playing the prophet, "will the Lord be honored by fire or by silence?" "Ahab," said the actor playing the king, "my advisors demand spectacle." "Prophet," said an elder, "the people need a sign." "Layla," said the guide watching, "signs can be misread." "Hanan," said softly, "the altar is a place of choice." "Dr. Miriam Katz," said the archaeologist, leaning in, "the stones contain layers of worship." "Ahmed," said the cobbler, "our fathers saw smoke rise from here." "Jacob," said the pilgrim, "I want to believe in a single answer." "Professor Rahim," said the epigrapher, "texts and stones will argue with each other." "Sarah," said a tourist, wiping her eyes, "I came to see conviction, not debate." The exchanges are not the biblical record, but the density of voices shows how ritual, politics, and personal faith meet on the ridge. Capernaum and Nazareth are towns where domestic detail meets gospel memory. In Capernaum, the remains of a synagogue open onto a courtyard where stone benches are cool to the touch and where a small cluster of homes reveals plaster and floors that speak to ordinary life in antiquity. Guide Layla tells a fisherman who once lived there and of how the synagogue stone has been reused and retooled across centuries. In Nazareth, narrow streets smell of frying oil and spices, and a humble house become a site of devotion with layers of chapels built one over the other. A local named Sarah runs a small shop selling icons and postcards, and she remembers a mosaicist who restored a chapel floor and left his fingerprints still visible in damp mortar. Ephesus and Caesarea show how the biblical world intersects imperial architecture. Ephesus has marble streets and a theater that once held tens of thousands, and the excavations have revealed inscriptions and mosaics that testify to a bustling port city with a Christian presence recorded in epistles. The smell of dust and crushed stone on a summer afternoon gives way to the cool shadow of colonnades and the sound of a distant bus. Caesarea has a restored harbor and amphitheater and a palace quarter where the stones are salt-kissed by the sea. Museum displays present amphorae and epigraphic fragments that anchor biblical mentions to a material world. Mount Nebo, the place Moses viewed the Promised Land according to Deuteronomy 34, presents a wind-blown plateau with an austere monastery. From the overlook, you see the sweep of valley and the shimmer of far horizons, and the air tastes of juniper and dust. Pilgrims leave small tokens at the memorial, and the monastery museum displays icons and fragments that connect text to place. Shiloh, the ancient sanctuary, is a quieter mount with occasional olive trees and a scent of aging time. Excavations have revealed cultic installations and pottery that suggest a long life of ritual and domesticity. Bethsaida and Beersheba are examples of how small settlements become symbolic anchors. Bethsaida sits near marshy lagoons, and the croak of frogs in evening is a sensory echo of a landscape that once fed a town. A fisherman named Mustafa remembers old nets and points out a low wall that may be the edge of a house described in texts. Beersheba has a ring of wells and the texture of stone-lined cisterns that still bear the finger marks of ancient masons. Local farmers like Rachel tend the fields and speak of family histories that include conquest and settlement with a weary pride. Megiddo, a strategic mound, offers panoramic views of a valley where armies met. The layers of occupation here are complex, and the horizon is broken by terraces and walls. The air smells of pine resin, and the taste of dust feels eternal. Excavations here have produced palatial structures and administrative archives in the form of clay tags that point to economic activity across centuries. Damascus is ancient yet alive and carries the memory of conversions and markets. In the streets, the aroma of spices and frying meat competes with the city's silt and the echo of a narrative in Acts 9 when a life was transformed. The Umayyad Mosque displays mosaics and a prayer hall that has been a magnet for devotion across traditions and time. The city feels like a conversation in architecture and ritual, where layers stack rather than erase. Now, a moment to pause and reflect. If until now you have felt the weight of history or the surprise of a discovery, you are in good company. These places move people. Tell us in the comments which location most surprised you and why. If you prefer, start your comment with "I would choose" and say which site you would visit first. Your observations help other viewers plan trips and help us choose future episodes. Readers who share memories or family stories enrich the narrative beyond what a camera can capture. After reading your replies, we will carry your questions into the next segments where archaeology and tradition sometimes clash. Your voice matters because it connects personal pilgrimage to scholarly conversation and to the daily lives of people like Ahmed, Layla, Hanan, and Dr. Miriam Katz, who steward these places now. The next stops show lesser visited sites with disproportionate emotional weight. Silos, a quiet plateau where ancient gatherings occurred, reveals pottery shards inscribed with short notes and a small shrine where villagers still plant candles. Tel Da, a windswept ruin, yields inscriptions to minor officials and a surprising mosaic that records a family name. Hebron is a city that holds deep memories and contested claims. The cave complex that tradition links to patriarchs is a place of layered reverence and of guarded access, where the stone is cold under the palm and the air is dense with whispered prayers. The community here is diverse, and the tensions between reverence and politics are immediate. Attention builds when archaeology upends cherished narratives. In a small moment of conflict, a curator named Dr. Miriam Katz discovered a floor assemblage that suggested a different chronology for a site long tied to a particular story. She presented the evidence to a local clergy person named Father Elias, and they argued about the implications. The disagreement was not merely academic. Dr. Miriam Katz said, "Science asks for dates and contexts." Father Elias replied, "The faithful rely on continuity of tradition." The room grew quiet. Both cared deeply. The moment forced a choice about whether to adjust liturgy or reframe teaching. The decision rippled through pilgrims and communities and made everyone reconsider what it means to honor the past when new evidence arrives. Across these 20 sites, we encounter relics and reliquaries and manuscripts in climate-controlled rooms and mosaics under protective canopies. We walk through monasteries and synagogues, through domed churches and ruinous sanctuaries where the sky replaces a roof. We meet pilgrims who recite psalms we can almost hear, and archaeologists who read soil like a layered book. Institutions such as the Israel Museum and Regional University departments protect finds and share them with the public that is hungry for connection. A second moment of tension centers on the Dead Sea manuscripts. When fragments first emerged, local communities feared loss and scholars feared damage. Negotiations over custody involve museums, curators, and local leaders. The scrolls themselves are fragile, and the argument about where they belong broke calls about cultural heritage and scholarly access. Voices rose in meetings and were tempered only when conservation plans offered cooperation. The situation revealed how discoveries can create responsibility as much as wonder. Toward the end of this tour, we confront synthesis. Across these sites, three motifs recur. First, the material record often confirms general outlines of text while complicating details. Second, tradition preserves memory in forms that are not always literal, but that carry communal meaning. Third, contemporary life reinterprets sacred geography daily through worship, markets, and politics. Can a traveler stand on a threshold and be certain about what once occurred there? Perhaps certainty is not the point. Presence is. Before we close, a final scene. At a small museum, a young epigrapher named Professor Rahim and a local guide named Layla and a pilgrim named Jacob debate the meaning of a new inscription. Their exchange has the cadence of people trying to reconcile feeling and fact. Professor Rahim says the letters point to a civic official, not a prophet. Layla says village memory remembers a prophet here. Jacob says, which should I trust, the soil or the story? Professor Rahim says both are testimonies. Layla says both are imperfect. Jacob says, I came for meaning. Professor Rahim says meaning is made between them. Layla says, and between you and the place. Jacob says, then I will listen more carefully. Their conversation shows how a visitor moves from certainty to curiosity and then to a deeper appreciation of nuance. In closing, walk back through these 20 places and feel how the land holds both the sacred and the ordinary. We saw Jerusalem and the Western Wall, Bethlehem and its grotto, the Sea of Galilee and an ancient boat, Mount Sinai and its desert monasteries, the Dead Sea and its manuscripts, Jericho and its tells, Mount Carmel and the disputed altar, Capernaum and Nazareth, Ephesus and Caesarea, Mount Nebo, Silo, Bethsaida, Beersheba, Megiddo, Damascus, and smaller sanctuaries that keep memory alive. Archaeology gave us shards of pottery, mosaics, and inscriptions. Tradition gave us rituals, prayers, and names that are repeated like refrains. Communities living on these sites remind us that heritage is never frozen, but always negotiated. If this journey stirred you, write which place you would visit first and why. Subscribe to follow more explorations that pair careful scholarship with respectfully told stories. Share this with someone who loves history and faith. Remember that the stones tell stories only when someone listens. The final image to hold is simple and ongoing, not a monument, but a hand pressed to cool ancient stone, feeling the faint echo of a prayer that began long ago and continues to be said today.